The ship was small and damaged. It moved slowly through space toward the giant station that floated among the stars. Inside the ship, a man named Daniel Price sat alone, looking out the window at his destination. Thought the Galactic Tribunal was the largest structure Daniel had ever seen. It was bigger than any city on Earth. Millions of aliens from hundreds of different species lived and worked there. For 12,000 years, this place had been the center of power in the galaxy. Every important decision was made here. Every war was started or stopped here. Every species that wanted to matter had to come here and prove their worth. Daniel was 43 years old. He had gray hair at the sides of his head and tired eyes that had seen too much. He wore a simple dark suit with no medals or decorations. He carried no weapons. He had no guards. He was completely alone. Behind his small ship, a medical transport followed. Inside that transport were 37 human colonists. Men, women, and children who had been captured by aliens 3 months ago. They had been working at a mining colony when the Vraxian warships came. The Vraxians took them without warning, without explanation. They were prisoners now, and Daniel had come to get them back. The station's docking bay was full of ships. Daniel saw hundreds of vessels from dozens of different species. Some were massive warships covered in weapons. Some were elegant diplomatic cruisers that shined like jewels. His own ship looked like a broken toy compared to them. Workers on the docking platform stopped what they were doing to stare at the human vessel. Some of them laughed. Daniel did not care. He had a job to do. He walked down the ramp of his ship and stepped onto the metal floor of the station. The air smelled strange, a mix of chemicals and alien scents that made his nose burn slightly. He ignored it and kept walking. A group of aliens waited for him near the entrance to the main corridor. They were Vraxians, the same species that had taken the human colonists. Daniel had studied everything he could find about them during the long journey here. The Vraxians were tall, much taller than humans. The smallest of them was 7 feet. Their bodies were covered in scales that changed color depending on their mood. Right now, those scales were purple and black, colors that meant contempt and amusement. They looked at Daniel the way a cat looks at a mouse. The leader of the group stepped forward. His name was Zethros, and he was a high commander in the Vraxian military. He had 4 eyes, 2 on each side of his head, and all 4 of them were focused on Daniel with open mockery. "So this is what humanity sends to the Galactic Tribunal," Zethros said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. One small man in a damaged ship. "I am almost insulted." Daniel stopped walking and looked up at the alien commander. He had to tilt his head back to see the creature's face. "I, Commander Zethros," Daniel said calmly. "I am Ambassador Daniel Price of the Terran Confederacy. I am here to secure the release of our citizens and to address the territorial dispute between our peoples." Zethros made a sound that might have been laughter. The other Vraxians joined in, their rough voices echoing through the docking bay. "Territorial dispute," Zethros repeated. "You call it a territorial dispute. Your species set up an illegal colony in space that belongs to the Dominion. We simply removed the invaders. There is no dispute. There is only your failure to understand your place in this galaxy." Daniel did not react to the insult. His face remained calm, his voice steady. The space in question was listed as unclaimed in all registered navigational charts. "We followed proper protocols for establishing a colony. If there was an error, I am here to discuss it peacefully." "Peacefully?" Zethros leaned down, bringing his face close to Daniel's. His breath was hot and smelled like copper. "Little human, do you know how many species have tried to stand against the Vraxian Dominion? Do you know how many of them still exist?" "I am not here to stand against anyone," Daniel said. "I am here to talk." Zethros straightened and gestured toward the corridor. "Then come. The tribunal is waiting." They are curious to see what kind of creature would come alone to face the judgment of the galaxy's greatest powers. Daniel followed the Vraxians through the station. The corridors were massive, built to accommodate species of all sizes. He saw aliens of every shape and color. Some walked on 2 legs like him. Some crawled on many legs. Some floated through the air on wings or gas bladders. All of them stopped to look at him as he passed. Many of them laughed or made sounds of dismissal. He heard whispers in languages he did not understand. But he did not need to understand the words to know what they were saying. They were saying that he was small. They were saying that he was weak. They were saying that humanity was nothing. The tribunal chamber was enormous. It was a circular room with platforms arranged in tiers around a central floor. Each platform belonged to a different species. The most powerful species sat on the highest tiers. The weakest sat near the bottom. Daniel saw that the platform assigned to humanity was barely a platform at all. It was a small square of metal on the ground floor, so low that he would have to look up at everyone else. He took his position without complaint. The chamber filled with delegates from 12 different species. Daniel studied each of them carefully. He saw the Vraxians on their high platform, their purple scales gleaming in the artificial light. He saw the Krellians, insect-like beings with sharp mandibles and multiple arms. He saw the Vorthani, floating clouds of gas that communicated through chemicals. He saw species he had never encountered before. Beings of crystal and metal and flesh. All of them looked down at him with the same expression: amusement, contempt, pity. A chime rang through the chamber, and everyone fell silent. A being of living crystal moved to the center of the room. This was the arbiter, the judge of the tribunal. Its body was transparent and seemed to glow from within. "This session of the Galactic Tribunal is now in order," the arbiter announced. Its voice resonated through the room like music from a glass instrument. "The Vraxian Dominion has brought charges of territorial violation against the species known as humans. The accused are present. Let the accused speak." Daniel stepped forward. Every eye in the chamber was on him. He could feel their judgment, their mockery, their certainty that he was nothing. He opened his mouth to speak, and the laughter began before he could say a single word. It came from everywhere at once. The Vraxians rumbled with deep, harsh sounds. The Krellians clicked their mandibles rapidly. The Vorthani expelled clouds of yellow gas. Even species Daniel had never seen before found ways to express their amusement. Daniel waited. He stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by laughter, and he did not move. He did not flinch. He did not look away. When the laughter finally died down, he spoke. "Honored Arbiter," he said, his voice clear and steady. "The mining colony in question was established in unclaimed space, according to all registered navigational charts. We request the immediate release of our captured citizens." More laughter. Zethros rose from his platform, his massive form blocking the light. "The human speaks of charts. Charts made by humans for humans. Your species emerged from your gravity barely 3 centuries ago. You have no fleet worth mentioning, no weapons that could threaten us, no allies who would risk anything to help you. And you come before this body making demands." "I make no demands," Daniel said. "I make a request, based on the principles this tribunal was founded to uphold." The laughter grew louder. Daniel Price stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all of them certain that he was nothing. He smiled. They did not know what that smile meant. They would learn. The arbiter raised one crystalline arm, and the chamber fell quiet. The laughter stopped, but the mockery remained in every face, every eye, every gesture. "The tribunal will now hear the proposed resolution from the Vraxian Dominion," the arbiter announced. Zethros stepped down from his platform. His heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber as he walked toward the center floor where Daniel stood. The Vraxian commander moved slowly, taking his time, letting everyone see the difference between them. He was massive. Daniel was small. He was covered in armor and scales. Daniel wore a simple suit. He represented the greatest military power in the known galaxy. Daniel represented a species that most beings in this room had never heard of until today. Zeth Ross stopped in front of Daniel and looked down at him with all four eyes. The Vraxian Dominion proposes the following resolution, Zethros said. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. The humans will withdraw from all territories beyond their home system. They will accept that space belongs to species strong enough to hold it, and they are not strong enough. The captured colonists will be kept by the Dominion as a labor force. This is compensation for the trouble their presence caused. Additionally, humanity will pay a tribute of mineral resources to the Dominion for the next 100 cycles. Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. The Krallian delegate clicked its mandibles in agreement. The Vorthani released a cloud of blue gas that signaled support. Even species that had no connection to this dispute seemed satisfied with the proposed terms. Daniel listened without expression. When Zethros finished speaking, Daniel asked a simple question. And if we refuse these terms? The chamber went silent again. But this time, the silence was different. There was surprise in it, confusion. No one had expected the human to refuse anything. Zethros leaned down until his face was level with Daniel's. His scales shifted from purple to deep red, a color that meant anger. If you refuse, Zethros said quietly, then we will take what we want by force. We will send our fleet to your colonies and burn them to ash. We will harvest your homeworld for whatever resources it contains. We will add your species to the long list of failed civilizations that thought they could stand against the Dominion. Daniel met the alien's gaze without fear. I see, he said. Thank you for making that clear. He reached into his jacket pocket. Every weapon in the chamber immediately pointed at him. Energy weapons hummed to life. Biological defenses tensed. Guards from a dozen species prepared to strike if the human pulled out anything dangerous. But all Daniel removed was a small communication device. It fit in the palm of his hand. Before we continue, Daniel said calmly, I would like to introduce the rest of my delegation. He pressed a button on the device. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The gathered species exchanged confused looks. Zethros made a snorting sound that expressed his impatience. The Arbiter's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. Then the space outside the chamber's viewing ports filled with light. Ships emerged from nowhere. They appeared in flashes of blue and white energy, jumping into normal space from somewhere far away. First there were 10, then 50, then hundreds. They kept coming, wave after wave, each wave larger than the last. Within 60 seconds, there were thousands of ships hanging in the darkness outside the station. They filled every viewing port. They blocked out the stars. They formed a wall of metal and weapons that surrounded the Galactic Tribunal on every side. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates screamed orders into communication devices. Alarms blared throughout the station. The Vraxian guards grabbed Zethros and tried to pull him back to their platform. The Arbiter's crystalline body flickered rapidly as it tried to process what was happening. Daniel stood in the center of it all, calm and still, waiting for the noise to die down. Impossible, the Arbiter said finally. Its voice was shaking, something Daniel had not thought possible for a being made of crystal. Our sensors detected no fleet presence within 50 light years of the station. How did you do this? Your sensors detected what we wanted them to detect, Daniel replied. The Terran Defense Initiative has spent the last 200 years developing stealth technology. We designed it specifically to avoid detection by the monitoring systems used by this tribunal. We knew we would need it eventually. Zethros broke free from his guards and grabbed Daniel by the front of his jacket. The Vraxian lifted the human off the ground with one hand, holding him in the air like a doll. "You dare threaten us?" Zethros roared. His scales had turned completely black, a color that meant murderous rage. "One command from me and your head will be separated from your body." Daniel's feet dangled in the air. His body hung from the alien's grip. But his voice remained steady. "High Commander, I want you to look at those ships very carefully. Count them. Then listen to what I am about to tell you." Zethros hesitated. Despite his rage, he was not stupid. He turned his head toward the viewing port and looked at the human fleet. His four eyes moved across the rows of vessels, trying to estimate their number. "Those ships represent about 40% of our active fleet," Daniel continued. "The rest are currently positioned around 12 strategic locations throughout Vraxian-controlled space." He paused, "including your homeworld." The communication device in Daniel's hand crackled with static. Then a voice emerged, speaking in English. The translation devices carried the words to every ear in the chamber. "Ambassador, this is Admiral Catherine Bell of the Terran vessel Constitution. We have confirmation that all strike groups are in position. We are waiting for your authorization." Zethros dropped Daniel. The human landed on his feet and took a moment to straighten his jacket. "You are lying," Zethros said. But his voice had lost its certainty. His scales flickered between colors, unable to settle on a single emotion. "Your species does not have the manufacturing capacity for such a fleet. The energy requirements alone would need decades of preparation," Daniel finished. "Yes, we began construction the day our first exploratory vessel detected Vraxian warships at the edge of our system. That was 87 years ago. We hoped we would never have to use them. But we prepared anyway." The Krellian delegate pushed through the crowd to get a better view of the human. Its mandibles clicked rapidly as it spoke. "This is not possible. We have traded with humans. We have visited their colonies. We have studied their technology. Nothing suggested military capability on this scale." "That was intentional," Daniel said. "We made ourselves look weak. We let you underestimate us. We accepted small losses and small insults while we built our strength in secret. And now, when we finally need that strength, we have it." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Delegates stared at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. The small human in the simple suit suddenly looked very different to them. He was no longer a joke. He was no longer something to laugh at. He was dangerous. The Arbiter moved closer to Daniel, its crystalline form chiming with agitation. "This is a violation of every protocol established by this tribunal. Military assets must be declared before any diplomatic session begins. You have broken the rules of this body." Daniel turned to face the Arbiter directly. "With respect, Arbiter, this tribunal has made it very clear that it only recognizes species capable of defending themselves. Every delegate in this chamber laughed at me when I arrived. They laughed because they thought humanity was weak. They thought we could not fight back. Well, we are demonstrating now that we can fight back. We are demonstrating that humanity is a species worthy of recognition." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate who had mocked him. "Are there any more objections?" No one spoke. Zethros stood frozen in place, his massive body rigid with shock. His scales had turned a pale gray color that Daniel did not recognize. Perhaps it meant fear. Perhaps it meant something else. Either way, the mighty High Commander of the Vraxian Dominion was no longer laughing. "What do you want?" Zethros asked quietly. Daniel picked up his communication device and held it loosely at his side. "I want what I asked for at the beginning of this session. The return of our citizens. recognition of our territorial claims, and one additional item that was not previously on the agenda. Name it. Daniel looked up at the alien commander. His voice was calm, but there was iron beneath the calm. An apology. The tribunal took a break for 6 hours. The delegates needed time to think. They needed time to make calls to their home planets. They needed time to understand what had just happened. During those 6 hours, 9 different species requested private meetings with Ambassador Daniel Price. He agreed to meet with 4 of them. The first meeting was with the Krellian trade delegation. Their representative was a being whose name translated roughly as clicking stone underwater. The Krellians were insect-like creatures with hard shells and many arms. They were known throughout the galaxy as merchants and traders. They had been dealing with other species for over 10,000 years. Clicking Stone entered the meeting room with careful movements. Its many legs tapped against the floor in a nervous rhythm. Before today, it had looked at Daniel with amusement. Now it looked at him with something closer to respect. "Ambassador Price," Clicking Stone said, "my people wish to understand something. How did your species remain hidden for so long? Our traders have visited your colonies many times. Our researchers have studied your communications. Nothing suggested military capability on this scale." Daniel poured himself a glass of water from a container on the table. Human-compatible refreshments had been added to the diplomatic quarters only a few hours ago. Before the fleet appeared, no one had bothered to provide anything for human visitors. "Clicking Stone, your people have a saying. The smallest creature in the river often survives because the larger ones do not notice it. We applied that idea on a much bigger scale. But why hide your strength?" Clicking Stone asked. "Showing your power earlier would have prevented many problems. Your colonies have been raided. Your citizens have been taken as slaves. You have suffered losses that could have been avoided." Daniel set down his water glass and thought carefully about his answer. "Let me tell you a story about my species. 400 years ago, before we left our planet, we were divided into hundreds of nations. These nations fought each other constantly. We developed weapons capable of destroying our entire world, and we came very close to using them many times." Clicking Stone's mandibles twitched. "This is known to us. It is one of the reasons the tribunal did not take your species seriously. Yes, and that period of near destruction taught us something important. We learned that the moment you show your full strength, everyone else begins preparing to counter it. They form alliances against you. They develop new weapons to defeat you. They study your weaknesses and find ways to exploit them. So we chose a different path. You chose to look weak. We chose patience," Daniel said. "We allowed other species to underestimate us. We accepted small losses while we built our true strength in secret. And when the time came to reveal that strength, we made sure we would not simply win. We made sure we would win so completely that no one would ever think about challenging us again." Clicking Stone was silent for a long moment. Then a clicking sound emerged from its body, a rhythm that Daniel's translator identified as laughter. But this was not mocking laughter. This was something else. Admiration, perhaps? Or wonder. "Ambassador, my people have been traders for 10,000 years. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have watched species destroy themselves and others in their hunger for power. And never, in all that time, have we met a race that understood the value of patience the way yours does." "We had good teachers," Daniel said. "Unfortunately, most of those lessons came from ourselves." The second meeting was with the Varthani. They were the gaseous beings Daniel had seen in the tribunal chamber. Their representative floated into the room like a cloud of colored smoke. It communicated by releasing different chemicals into the air, which Daniel's translator converted into speech. The Varthani were worried about what the human fleet meant for the stability of the region. They had territories near Vraxian space and were concerned about getting caught in a war between two larger powers. Daniel assured them that humanity had no plans to expand aggressively. They wanted peaceful relations with all species. The fleet was for defense, not conquest. The Vorthani representative released a cloud of blue gas that meant cautious acceptance. It was not fully convinced, but it was willing to wait and see what humanity did next. The third meeting was with the crystal in the cord. The Arbiter itself came to speak with Daniel. Its body chimed and flickered as it moved through the doorway. "Ambassador Price," the Arbiter said, "I wish to understand your technology. Our sensors are the most advanced in the known galaxy. They should not have failed to detect your fleet. How did you accomplish this?" Daniel smiled politely. "With respect, Arbiter, I am not able to share the details of our stealth systems. That technology is classified at the highest levels. However, I would be happy to discuss the possibility of a joint research program in the future, once our species have established better relations." The Arbiter's crystalline form flickered with what might have been frustration, but it accepted Daniel's answer and left, without further argument. The fourth meeting was the strangest of all. A small being entered Daniel's quarters without warning. It was short, barely reaching Daniel's waist, with gray skin and large dark eyes that seemed to take up half its face. Daniel had never seen this species before. He had not seen them in the tribunal chamber. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. The being's mouth moved, but the sounds it made were difficult for the translator to process. The words came out broken and incomplete. "We are the quiet ones," the being said. "We have watched your species longer than you know. We are pleased." "Pleased by what?" "By your patience, by your restraint, by your willingness to suffer in the short term for victory in the long term. These are rare qualities among the young species. They suggest you may survive." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about this being that made him uncomfortable. Something ancient and knowing in those large dark eyes. "Survive what?" he asked. The being blinked slowly. "What comes next?" "What do you mean? What comes next?" But the being did not answer. It simply turned and walked out of the room, disappearing into the corridor without another word. Daniel stood alone in the meeting room for several minutes, thinking about what the Quiet One had said. He had spent 87 years preparing for a confrontation with species like the Vraxians. But the way the Quiet One spoke suggested there was something else out there. Something bigger. Something that even the great powers of the Galactic Tribunal might not be ready for. He pushed the thought aside. He had more immediate problems to deal with. The Tribunal would reconvene soon, and he still had to negotiate the release of the human prisoners. But he did not forget the Quiet One's words. He filed them away in the back of his mind, along with all the other pieces of information that might become important someday. Survive what comes next. Humanity had survived many things. Ice ages, plagues, wars that nearly destroyed their civilization. The long journey from their birth planet to the stars. Whatever came next, they would survive that too. They had to. The 6th hour ended. A chime sounded throughout the station, calling the delegates back to the tribunal chamber. Daniel straightened his jacket, finished his glass of water, and walked out to finish what he had started. The real negotiation was about to begin. The tribunal chamber looked different now. It was the same room. The same platforms arranged in tiers. The same delegates sitting in their assigned positions. But something had changed. The elevated platforms that had seemed like thrones of power before now looked like exposed positions. Places that could be easily targeted if the fighting started. Daniel noticed that many delegates had moved their seats back from the edges of their platforms. Some species had brought additional guards. Others had sent their most important members away, leaving only lower-ranked representatives behind. They were afraid. Zethros had changed too. The Vraxian commander no longer wore his ceremonial armor. He had replaced it with simple diplomatic robes. His four eyes no longer showed contempt when they looked at Daniel. They showed something else. Caution, perhaps. Or calculation. The arbiter chimed for attention, and the chamber fell silent. This session will address the revised terms proposed by the Terran Confederacy, the arbiter announced. Ambassador Price, you may present your demands. Daniel stepped forward into the center of the chamber. He could feel every eye in the room watching him. The terms are simple, he said. First, the immediate release of all human captives held by the Vraxian Dominion. They will receive full medical care and transportation to Terran territory. Second, recognition of all currently established human colonies as sovereign Terran space. No species will interfere with our settlements without facing consequences. Third, establishment of a neutral zone between Vraxian and Terran territories. This will prevent future accidents and misunderstandings. Fourth, payment by the Dominion of compensation for damages caused to human installations and citizens. Zethros raised one massive hand. His voice was controlled, careful, very different from the roaring confidence he had shown before. The Dominion accepts terms 1 through 3. We request more information about Term 4. What level of compensation does humanity consider appropriate? Daniel had expected this question. He had prepared his answer carefully. 1 credit. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The arbiter's crystalline form flickered with confusion. Ambassador, perhaps there was an error in translation. Did you say 1 credit? I did. The payment is symbolic. Its only purpose is to establish that the Dominion caused harm and acknowledges that harm. We are not interested in taking your wealth or making you poor. We want peace, not revenge. More murmurs. The delegates whispered to each other, trying to understand what the human was doing. This was not how negotiations worked. When you had power, you used it to take as much as you could. Everyone knew this. It was the way the galaxy had worked for thousands of years. Zethros stared at Daniel for a long moment. His scales shifted through several colors before settling on a gray-blue shade that Daniel did not recognize. Your species is strange, Zethros said finally. You prepare for war with a patience that borders on madness. You build a fleet capable of destroying civilizations. Then, when victory is within your grasp, you offer mercy. I do not understand you. Perhaps that is because you expected us to behave the way you would in our position. Yes, Zethros admitted. I expected you to destroy us. Or at least to cripple us so badly that we could never threaten you again. That is what the Dominion would have done. That is what every species in this chamber would have done. Daniel walked forward until he stood directly in front of the Vraxian commander. He had to look up to meet the alien's eyes, but he did so without hesitation, without fear. Commander, let me tell you what humanity actually wants. We want to explore the galaxy. We want to meet new species and learn from them. We want to trade ideas and goods and knowledge. We want to build things together that none of us could build alone. He paused. We have been preparing for war for 87 years. But the whole time, we were hoping for peace. We did not build our fleet because we wanted to use it. We built it because we knew that the only way to have peace is to be strong enough to defend it. Zethros was quiet for a long time. The entire chamber was quiet. Even the species that had nothing to do with this dispute were silent, listening to every word. And if peace is not possible? Zethros asked. What then? Daniel's expression did not change. His voice remained calm. But there was something beneath that calm. Something hard and cold. Then we have enough ships to make sure any war ends quickly. But I hope it never comes to that. I truly hope, High Commander, that this moment marks the beginning of a new relationship between our peoples. A relationship built on respect, not fear. On cooperation, not conflict. Zethros looked at Daniel for another long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his massive hand toward the human. Ambassador Price, the Vraxian Dominion accepts your terms. All of them, including the apology you requested earlier. Daniel took the offered hand. It was huge, almost completely covering his own. The scales were rough against his skin. I apologize, Zethros said. His voice was loud enough for everyone in the chamber to hear. I apologize for underestimating your species. It will not happen again. Apology accepted, Daniel said. Now, let us discuss how we move forward. The rest of the session lasted for several hours. There were many details to work out. Orders to define. Procedures to establish. Protocols to agree upon. But the hard part was over. The threat of war had passed. When the session finally ended, Daniel walked out of the tribunal chamber, feeling more tired than he had ever felt in his life. The weight of the last few days pressed down on him like a physical force. He had done what he came to do. The human prisoners would be released. The colonies would be protected. Humanity had proven itself to the galaxy. But as he walked through the corridors of the station, he could not forget the words of the Quiet One. What comes next? There was something out there. Something the Quiet Ones knew about. Something they had been watching for, waiting for, perhaps preparing for. Daniel did not know what it was. But he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that humanity's trials were not over. This confrontation with the Vraxians was just the beginning. A test. A small test compared to whatever was coming. We may survive, the Quiet One had said. Not we will survive. May. That single word carried more weight than all the ships in the human fleet. Daniel reached the docking bay where his ship waited. The medical transport was being prepared to receive the human prisoners. In a few hours, they would be free. They would be going home. He allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Whatever came next, today had been a victory. Today, humanity had stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and had not been found wanting. Today, the aliens who had laughed at him learned that they had made a terrible mistake. Daniel Price climbed aboard his ship and began preparing for the journey home. 6 months had passed since the tribunal session. Daniel Price stood on the observation deck of a newly built diplomatic station. The station floated in the neutral zone between Terran and Vraxian space. It was a symbol of the new relationship between the two peoples. A place where diplomats and traders from both species could meet without suspicion or fear. Through the viewing ports, Daniel could see ships from a dozen different species moving through the area. Vraxian cargo vessels passed alongside human transports. Krellian trading ships docked at ports that had been built to accommodate their unusual designs. Even a few Vorthani vessels floated nearby, their gaseous crews contained within specially designed chambers. Behind Daniel, a reception was taking place. Representatives from 14 species had gathered to celebrate the signing of the Galactic Cooperation Accord. This was a new treaty, one that established rules for peaceful interaction between humanity and the major powers of the galaxy. It was not perfect. There were still tensions, still disagreements, still species that did not trust each other. But it was a start. A young woman approached Daniel with 2 glasses of champagne. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a military style, and she wore the uniform of the Terran Defense Initiative. Her name tag identified her as Lieutenant Commander Sophie Price. "Dad," Sophie said, handing him a glass. "Admiral Bell wants to know if you have time for a briefing tomorrow. Something about new sensor contacts at the edge of explored space." Daniel accepted the champagne but did not drink immediately. "Tell her I will be there." "How are the integration programs going?" Better than expected. The Raxians are actually quite good at building things. Their engineers have been working with ours on the new shipyard designs. They have cut the projected construction time by almost a third. And the Krellians? They have proposed a joint trading program that would give both our species access to markets on the far side of the galaxy. The economic projections are incredible. If it works, our standard of living could improve significantly within a generation. Daniel nodded slowly. He sipped his champagne and looked out at the stars. Sophie, do you remember what I told you when you were young? About why I chose to become a diplomat instead of staying in the military? Sophie thought for a moment. You said that winning a war meant surviving it, but winning a peace meant building something that would last beyond your lifetime. Yes. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something. Something I have never told anyone except Admiral Bell and a few others at the highest levels of the initiative. Sophie looked at her father with concern. What is it? I was terrified in that tribunal chamber. I stood there looking up at Zethros, knowing that if he called our bluff, if he realized the truth, everything would have fallen apart. What do you mean? The report said everything went according to plan. Reports are written by people who were not in the room. Daniel took another sip of champagne. The truth is that we were making things up as we went. Our stealth technology was good, but not good enough to fool a detailed investigation. Our fleet was impressive, but the Raxians could have matched it if they had been willing to bring ships from other territories. Sophie stared at her father. Then how did we win? We won because Zethros believed we were stronger than we actually were. We won because he looked at our fleet and assumed we had more ships hidden somewhere else. We won because he could not imagine a species that would bring everything they had to a single confrontation. Daniel smiled slightly. We bet everything on a single hand, and the Vraxians folded because they thought we had more cards. That seems incredibly dangerous. It was. But there are moments in the life of a civilization when dangerous bets are the only option. We had spent 8 decades preparing for that confrontation. When it arrived, we had to make it count. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that had been on her mind since she learned about the tribunal. Dad, what would you have done if Zethros had attacked? If he had realized we were bluffing? Daniel turned away from the stars and looked directly at his daughter. I would have done whatever was necessary to protect our people. That is what humanity has always done. We adapt. We survive. We find ways to keep going, even when survival seems impossible. And then we build something better from whatever is left. He raised his glass toward the viewing port. To humanity. May we always be underestimated by our enemies. And may we always prove them wrong. Sophie raised her glass as well. They drank together, father and daughter, standing on the edge of human space and looking out at the infinite possibilities beyond. Behind them, the reception continued. Species that had been strangers 6 months ago were finding common ground, building connections, laying the foundations for a future that none of them could have imagined before. Chime sounded on Daniel's communication device. He looked at the screen and saw a message from Admiral Bell. The sensor contacts at the edge of explored space had been confirmed. They were artificial. They were moving. And they were like nothing humanity had ever encountered before. Daniel thought about the quiet ones, about their strange words, about their warning. What comes next? He put the device back in his pocket. Tomorrow, he would deal with the sensor contacts. Tomorrow, he would begin preparing for whatever new challenge was coming. But tonight, he would allow himself to enjoy what humanity had accomplished. They had faced the most powerful beings in the galaxy and had not been broken. They had turned enemies into allies. They had built something that might last for generations. And if something else was coming, something larger and more dangerous than anything they had faced before, Then humanity would face that too. They would adapt. They would survive. They would find a way. It was what they had always done. Out in the darkness between the stars, something ancient and vast continued to watch. It had observed countless species rise and fall over millions of years. Most of them had failed. Most of them had destroyed themselves or been destroyed by others. But these humans were different. They had patience. They had restraint. They had the ability to see beyond immediate gratification to long-term survival. They might be useful. They might be dangerous. Either way, they were interesting. The watching presence shifted its attention slightly, tracking the sensor contacts that human equipment had just detected. Those contacts were a test. A small one. A way to see how this young species would respond to something truly unknown. If they passed this test, there would be others. Harder tests. More dangerous tests. Tests that would determine whether humanity would join the ranks of the truly advanced civilizations or burn out like so many before them. The quiet ones would continue watching. They had been watching for a very long time. They would watch for as long as it took. In the meantime, Daniel Price finished his champagne, said goodnight to his daughter, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, he slept peacefully. Humanity had proven itself today. Tomorrow, they would do it again. And the day after that. And the day after that. For as long as it took. For as long as the stars burned and the darkness held secrets. Humanity would endure. It was what they did best. The end.